Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. In an effort to tackle inflation, the Bank of Canada raised its key interest rate yet again, this time by a full percentage point. With close to 4,000 Ukrainian refugees arriving in Alberta, the province announced more funding help. And farmers in the Netherlands have blocked major roadways and access to supermarkets, protesting their federal government. We will explain why.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's going to cost a lot more to get a loan, and mortgage rates will be rising thanks to the Bank of Canada raising its key interest rate one more time. The central bank increased its rate by a full percentage point to 2.5% on Wednesday. That's the largest increase since August of 1998.
An increase of this magnitude in one meeting is very unusual. It reflects very unusual economic circumstances. Inflation is nearly 8%, a level not seen in nearly 40 years. I want to explain to Canadians why we took this decision. There are three key considerations. First, inflation is too high, and more people are getting more worried that high inflation is here to stay. We cannot let that happen. Restoring price stability, low, stable, and predictable inflation is paramount. Second, the Canadian economy is overheated. There are shortages of workers and of many goods and services. Demand needs to slow so supply can catch up and price pressures ease. And third, our goal is to get inflation back to its 2% target with a soft landing for the economy.
Now, shortly after the Bank of Canada announcement, the five big banks announced their prime rates are increasing from 3.7 to 4.7%. Canada's premiers wrapped up their meeting in Victoria, BC this week. Many are calling on the Trudeau Liberals to fix Canada's broken healthcare system. The Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, Andrew Furey, who's also a surgeon, says now's the time to modernize our healthcare coming out of the pandemic.
I've been on the other side of a gurney. I've had to cancel surgeries. I've been dealing with nurses who have worked 24 hours in a row, seen nurses leave the OR crying because they can't get to a family member's wedding. I've lived it. The time has come, the pandemic has heightened it, but now is the time for all levels of government to work in a collaborative way to modernize the system, to deliver Canadian level, all of which we celebrate around the world, have operated around the world. We are known around the world for our standards of care. We can do it, but we need to do it together. And exchanging rhetoric in the media is unfortunate, but we have to come together collaboratively in order to save the Canadian healthcare system.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau signed a book of condolences for former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe at the Japanese Embassy in Ottawa. Abe was assassinated during a speech on July the 8th, and a funeral held in Tokyo on Tuesday drew thousands of people.
A strong and thoughtful and compassionate leader who had tremendous depth of perspective, not just in regards to Japan, but on the world stage. His voice around the G7 table, his engagement in the significant issues of the time will be deeply missed. My very first G7 meeting was hosted by Shinzo-san in Ise-shima, Japan, and I was just arriving on the world stage as a leader, and he showed patience and grace and incredible generosity with me and with everyone gathered. His way of sharing what mattered and pushing hard for it in a way that was always graceful, but always firm in his commitment to his country and its citizens.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also responded to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky blasting Canada for Ottawa's decision to return turbines used in a pipeline to carry natural gas from Russia to Germany. The turbines were sent to Montreal for repairs and were caught up in the economic sanctions Canada imposed on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine.
So this was a very difficult decision. But we have seen Russia consistently trying to weaponize energy as a way of creating division amongst the allies, of undermining the general population's support for this essential effort in Ukraine that governments continue to support. And I remind people that the sanctions that Canada's leading on, that we continue to push harder and harder, are aimed at Putin and his enablers and aren't designed to harm our allies and their populations.
As the Russian offensive intensifies in eastern Ukraine, authorities are urging residents to evacuate for safer cities in the western part of the country. Some Ukrainians, however, are refusing to leave.
Некуда ехать и не к чему. Ну что я там буду делать? Что? Сидеть как тут хоть вышел, на лавочке посидел, свежим воздухом подышал, а тут телевизор посмотрел, а там что я буду? Хоть бы работал как-нибудь, а то ж.
More than 3,800 Ukrainian refugees are making their way to our province. The Alberta government is giving those arriving after July 25th 6 months of temporary income assistance. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson says the province continues to support those who are fleeing the war with Russia.
The Alberta government has been very bullish, shall we say, on supporting people from Ukraine who've arrived here, of course, because there's 350-odd thousand, I think, Ukrainians in Alberta, so quite a large diaspora population. And this is just sort of the latest in a series of announcements the government has made. I think they've spent about $15 million to date on supports for people coming from Ukraine. They're working to process some sort of work visas and things like that more quickly, that sort of thing. But this new announcement, as you say, is sort of temporary income assistance for food, clothing, shelter, all the things that a person needs when they arrive on our shores, so to speak. And that'll cost between $15 million and I think $38 million was sort of the upper end. And, the reason for that enormous range is it really just depends how many people come.
Mr. Tyler Dawson will have more on the Ukrainian refugees coming to Canada coming up in the second half of our program. There are reports that Dutch police shot at a tractor as the protests against government's plans to cut pollutant emissions intensifies. Police in northern Friesland said no one was hurt as the tractor broke free from the line. Dutch farmers are angry at government plans to slash emissions. They've blocked roads and supermarket distribution centers, sparking fears of food shortages. Farmers are angry at a government proposal to have farmers cut down on nitrogen oxide and ammonia by 50% by the year 2030. Provincial governments have been given a year to formulate plans to achieve the goal. The reforms even include reducing livestock. Farmers argue that they're being unfairly targeted and are being given no perspective for their future.
We have a lot of rules, and they're all changing the rules during the years. And so we want to have a point on the horizon, about 20, 30 years, says that's the way we go. And then we can do it, but they always change the rules. The rules about nitrogen, but the rules about protection, the air, the crops, which, for example, there's a lot of rules.
Well, here in southwestern Alberta, some of our farmers have been celebrating some of the moisture we've been receiving. We saw light showers again in and around Lethbridge today. Jeanette Rocher, who is broadcasting from the Calgary Stampede, the greatest outdoor show on earth, has an early peek at our weather forecast. Jeanette, will those rain clouds be moving on?
Yeah, Hal, there was a lot of moisture and some humidity across southwestern Alberta today, with temperatures reaching upwards of 30 degrees. It was definitely a hot one. Into tonight, though, Lethbridge could see more showers, chance of some thunderstorms developing. Tomorrow, though, those skies are going to clear up, mainly sunny skies. Lethbridge is going to see temperature up to 31 degrees. As for the rest of the week, I'll have all those details coming up for you later on in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, partner, and great hat. A new report by Stats Canada is providing some much-needed insight into our veteran population here in Canada. A total of 97,625 Canadians were counted as serving in the Canadian Armed Forces, and 461,240 were counted as veterans. Glenn Miller, the co-chair of the Public Relations Committee for the Lethbridge Legion, says there are a high number of Legion members and veterans who live right here in our city.
We roughly have 1,000 members, of which a third of that are veterans. And of those veterans, many of those veterans do not consider themselves veterans. Many veterans today, when you hear the term modern day veteran, will have a different interpretation for every veteran. And modern day veteran might be only the last 5 years or 35 years ago.
The report went on to say that veteran numbers are expected to decline greatly in the next 5 years. New census data from Stats Canada shows that Canadian incomes trended close to 10% higher during the early part of the pandemic compared to 5 years earlier. The agency's chief of the Centre for Income says the median after-tax household income in 2020 was around $73,000.
When employment-related benefits such as the CERB and employment insurance are added to employment income, we can see that there were fewer Canadians in lower income categories and more Canadians in higher income categories in 2020 compared with 2019. So for example, in 2020, there were close to 1.8 million fewer Canadians with employment-related benefits under $15,000, including close to 1 million fewer Canadians with no employment income or employment-related benefits. On the other hand, also in 2020, there were 1.8 million more Canadians with employment income or employment-related benefits of $15,000 or more, including just over 250,000 more Canadians with employment income or employment-related benefits of $60,000 or more.
The Emergency Response Benefit, or CERB, helped millions of Canadians during the COVID-19 pandemic. For Stephanie Fortin, the money was not just a way to cover her bills when finding work, but it also gave her time to reflect on herself and plan out her education and career steps. Fortin is now a recent graduate of a dental assistance program.
Well, of course, it gave me financial freedom, still being able to afford all my bills and eating and my rent. And I still had some left over to kind of figure out what I enjoy out of life. So I started, as everyone did, kind of baking, cooking, and getting in touch with my creative side. So drawing, coloring, painting, etc. So just exploring a little bit all the stuff that I told myself I didn't have enough time to. For the first time, for a lot of us, we couldn't identify with as a job anymore. Like, I couldn't say I'm a receptionist, I work in retail. I had to discover who I am without all the noise, because we were left at home or outside on short walks. So I had the opportunity and the time now to figure out what I enjoy and what I wanted for myself in the future and what kind of lifestyle I wanted to create for myself.
It appears as though more and more adult children are now living with their parents. New information from Stats Canada says with the cost of living going through the roof, many are now living with their folks in large urban centres either out of necessity or preference.
The age profile of young adults who live with their parents has continued to shift to older ages. In 2021, close to 1 in 2 young adults who live with their parents were aged 25 to 34, compared to less than 2 in 5 20 years earlier, that is in 2001. Now, young adults may live with their parents out of necessity, preferences, or both. While some young adults may have always remained in their parents' home, others may have returned after 1 or more periods living elsewhere, including during the pursuit of studies or while living with a spouse or a partner, among other possibilities.
Millions of dollars are expected to be raised for Tim Hortons Camp Day, a great cause. The Tim Hortons in Coaldale, Alberta was celebrating on Wednesday with all purchases of hot or iced coffee going to help youth in underserved communities. Video journalist Micah Quinn was at the Coaldale Timmy's, where local politicians came to help out, including the mayor of Coaldale himself.
I bow my head to the workers in the fast food restaurants.
Coaldale Mayor Jack Van Ryan came out to man the drive-thru at the town's Tim Hortons on Wednesday during the organization's Camp Day fundraiser.
It's unbelievable how fast-paced it is, and if it wasn't for all their help, I would have made so many mistakes today. It was a lot of fun.
Alex Gallant, the assistant manager for the Coaldale Tim Hortons, says all the donations for the day go towards supporting kids who would otherwise not be able to make it to camp due to COVID stress or financial issues.
Any iced coffee purchase goes towards Camp Day. There's bracelets. There's Camp Day socks this year, which we didn't do last year, which is nice, at $5. And then there's rent a tent and rent a cabin. So the rent a tent's $1, rent a cabin $5.
In 2021, the Coaldale Tim Hortons generated close to $8,000 in donations, and Gallant added that customers have been gracious with their money.
They're very willing to help out with the kids in need and sending them to camp. They really take it to heart and really try and help out as much as they can.
As of last year, Tim Hortons Camp Day has raised $212 million to benefit foundation camps that support more than 300,000 youth between the ages of 12 to 16 years old. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
I think it's just about time for another iced coffee. You know, with our hot and mainly dry weather we've received over the last couple of weeks, Lethbridge Fire has placed a fire ban on all open fires in the city's River Valley. Chief Fire Marshal Heath Wright says when it comes to placing a ban, they look to see how much moisture is down at the river bottom before deciding to put a ban into place. And right now, they have no idea how long the fire ban will last.
We have no indication right now, just because the weather type, the weather controls whether the fire ban is released or not, because strictly on the data that we collect from the forestry and agriculture. We look for certain data that ranges from low all the way to extreme fire risk. And we also look for ISI, which is an initial spread index, which doesn't mean much to the public, but what it means is how fast a fire could spread through the vegetation and the fuel that's down there.
Now, those with backyard fire pits are still allowed to be used in the River Valley, as it falls under the open burning bylaw. Christian Canadian singer and songwriter Brian Dirksen will be holding a worship night this Saturday at City Lights Church in Lethbridge. It's a collaborative event between City Lights and the Gate Church. The organizer for the concert says after being separated for the last couple of years due to the pandemic, he got a calling from God, and he knew he wanted to find a way to help bring people together.
One of the ways to really try and entice people to come together and for a common unity goal was to have an established award-winning artist such as Brian Dirksen.
What was it like to hear these words on that Sunday morning?
Any time that we come together and unite for a common goal, that there is a greater sense of togetherness, hopefully some emotional healing after being separated for 2 years, and hopefully there will be some motivation, and hopefully it grows into something further for years to come.
The concert will be taking place at 7 p.m. with the doors opening at 6:30 p.m. on Saturday. And details on how to buy tickets can be found on our website, bridgecitynews.ca. You know, it appears as though emotions ran high for many during the COVID-19 pandemic. Cancellations, closures, and lockdowns hit many of us pretty hard, had many of us on edge. Stephen Anterburn is the host of a Christian counseling talk show. He also wrote a book called 100 Days to Freedom of Anger. He says it's so important right now to not allow a toxic mindset to take a hold of you.
Our minds are very, very fragile sometimes. And if you just keep feeding your brain with anger, bitterness, every kind of reason to reject people, you just get emotionally unhealthy, unbalanced. And so if that's the way you are, what do? Well, you just need to get some help. Getting help isn't a weakness, it's a strength.
We had some light rain in parts of southwestern Alberta today, which was a blessing for our farmers. But the rain clouds, however, should be leaving us fairly soon. Full weather details are coming up. We had a little bit of humidity today here in southwestern Alberta with the rain, and it was hot once again. Jeanette Rocher, who joins us now from the greatest outdoor show on earth, the Calgary Stampede, joins us now with more weather details. Jeanette, will the moisture be leaving much of southern Alberta?
Well, Hal, a number of areas across southern Alberta did see some moisture, including certain parts of Calgary, which saw 40% chance of showers. Downtown here, though, it's been hot and sunny all day. As for Lethbridge, we could see some showers developing overnight with a low of 11 degrees. Thursday, the rain clouds should clear out, leaving us with lots of sunshine in Lethbridge and a high near 31. Even hotter on Friday and Saturday under a mainly clear sky with highs both days reaching 33. Sunday, cooling off slightly under a mainly sunny sky with high of 29. Monday, expect a high near 29 degrees again. Tuesday, it should be even hotter with a high near 32. Checking the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 25 degrees with an average low of 10. The highest temperature recorded on this day was 37 degrees in 2000, and the record low was only 3 degrees back in 1974. The sun rose at 5:38 a.m. and is set today at 9:36 p.m. Let's see how Thursday is shaping up across the country now. It should be partly cloudy in Victoria with a high of 22. Just a few clouds as well in Vancouver with a high of 23. Here in Calgary, for the Calgary Stampede, there was a heat warning today. Thursday, expect lots of sunshine with a high near 30 degrees. Mainly sunny and 28 for Edmonton. Regina should see lots of sunshine with a high of 29. Saskatoon had a heat warning today as well. Thursday, a mainly clear sky with a high of 29. A chance of showers developing with a high of 27 for Winnipeg. In the central part of the country, expect light rain and 26 in Toronto. Showers and 23 for both Ottawa and Montreal. In Atlantic Canada, it should be mainly sunny and 27 in Fredericton. Increasing clouds and 27 as well for Halifax. Mainly cloudy and 21 degrees in Charlottetown. And in St. John's, expect a few clouds with a high of 24 on Thursday. And Hal, that's a look at our weather from the greatest outdoor show on earth, the Calgary Stampede.
Please make sure you bring back some mini donuts. The Bank of Canada raised its key interest rate by a full percentage point, marking the largest hike since August of 1998. The central bank's decision signals a more aggressive approach to bringing skyrocketing inflation back down to its target of 2%. Most economists forecasted a rate hike of 0.75 of a percentage point after inflation reached a 39-year high of 7.7% in May. Today's rate hike brings the overnight interest rate up to 2.5%. Rogers Communications, in an effort to win back Canadians' trust, will credit customers the equivalent of 5 days of service instead of the 2 days announced by the company originally. This follows a massive network outage which impacted millions of Canadians last Friday. Many were left without internet, TV, or wireless services for over a 19-hour period. The company is also staring down the possibility of a class action lawsuit. One Bay Street analyst estimated the Canadian economy took a $142 million hit with businesses unable to process debit or credit transactions. Canadian food suppliers are once again telling grocery stores of upcoming price hikes. The letters from various dairy producers signal more price increases will hit grocery store shelves this fall. In some cases, the higher prices are due to the Canadian Dairy Commission's approval of a second milk price increase this year. Farm gate milk prices are set to go up around 2 cents per litre, or around 2.5% on September the 1st. Royal LePage has drastically cut its forecast for home prices this year. The real estate brokerage has been calling for a 15% year-over-year increase for the fourth quarter. It says the aggregate price of a home in the fourth quarter this year will be up around 5% compared with the same quarter last year. In its house price survey, the company says the average price of a home in Canada was $815,000. That, of course, includes Toronto and Vancouver. That is up just over 12% compared with 2021, but down almost 5% compared with its record high in the first quarter of this year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 63 points on the day to finish at 18,615. The Dow was down 208 points to 30,772. The S&P 500 was down 17 points to 3801, and the Nasdaq was also down on the day 17 points to 11,247. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 61 cents to 96.45 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 44 cents to 6.60 US. Gold was down 11 cents to 17.3539 US an ounce, and silver was down a cent to 19.21 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $12.38 per bushel, barley's at $8.70, canola's at $18.23, and corn is at $11 per bushel. Live cattle were up 20 cents for the August contract to $136.88. Feeder cattle August contract was up $1.23 to $180.80, and lean hogs July contract was up 90 cents to $114.50. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 77.04 US. Recapping one of our top stories, It's going to cost a lot more to get a loan, and mortgage rates will be going up again thanks to the Bank of Canada raising its key interest rate one more time. The bank increased its rate by a full percentage point to 2.5%. That is the largest increase since August of 1988. Now, shortly after the Bank of Canada announcement, the 5 big banks announced their prime rates are increasing from 3.7 to 4.7%. UCP leadership hopeful Brian Jean has an idea how the province can save you and I an extra 15 cents a litre at the pumps. Our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson will have details next. But first, here's a look at some of the special events taking place right here in southwestern Alberta.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. The Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization is looking for volunteers to take part in their Drive Happiness program. This program is to help seniors in our community who are facing extreme loneliness due to a lack of accessible transportation. Volunteers will drive clients to their medical appointments, pick up groceries, and take them to important life activities. If you're interested in this opportunity and for more information, call 403-332-4320 or email volunteer@volunteerlethbridge.com. Lethbridge Legal Guidance is a nonprofit society offering free legal advice to low-income Southern Albertans. It holds clinics on Tuesdays from 4 to 6 p.m. by appointment only. Some of the areas the society assists in include family, criminal, traffic, immigration, EI, and other issues. For more information, call 403-380-6338 or visit their website, lethbridgelegalguidance.ca.
The United Conservatives here in Alberta will be choosing their new leader on October the 6th. Leadership candidates are slowly announcing that they've met the requirements to make it through the race. Travis Taves and Daniel Smith both submitted their paperwork and fees to make it official. Others are close behind. Now, to discuss this in more detail is our political reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson, who joins us once again from Edmonton. Tyler, as for the UCP leadership candidates, you say we may see a bit of a thinning of the herd soon, since the actual deadline to enter the race is July 20th?
That's right. So you had sort of all these people announce and start their campaigns, but there is actually sort of an official start, an official time when they need to cough up the money, cough up the signatures, all that kind of stuff to be in. As I think we discussed a little while ago, the fees are substantial. I think $150,000 or $175,000 to enter, and then $25,000 is sort of a deposit, a guarantee of good behavior, essentially. So these are somewhat high bars to clear, and it's a thick herd at the moment. I think 9 people or something like that. So I would expect we see at least a couple people not sort of clear that threshold. Of course, they've got staff going around the Calgary Stampede this week trying to get signatures and all that kind of stuff, because there's all sorts of specific rules about signatures and all those sorts of things. But yeah, we should know in the next few days here what the sort of final slate of contenders is going to look like.
What are your thoughts on Rana Ambrose joining the Rebecca Schultz campaign?
I think it's a big boost to Rebecca Schultz's campaign. I think a lot of the attention has been on Brian Jean and Danielle Smith and Travis Taves, and Rebecca Schultz has not got quite as much attention. But it's interesting because Rana Ambrose is one of those names that is always sort of floated as the person who can save the Conservatives, whether that's the federal Conservatives, whether that's the provincial Conservatives. So it's interesting to see her throwing her weight a little bit behind a specific candidate in this race, and that could make some difference here, I think. But it's still very early days. We don't have tons of polling yet on what's going to happen, so it's hard to sort of predict beyond that.
Yeah, I remember interviewing Rana Ambrose on the Hill when she was health minister under the Harper government, and a very intelligent woman, so she brings a lot of clout to anyone's campaign. Tyler, one of the UCP leadership candidates, Brian Jean, has endorsed the idea of a royalty cut to energy companies. He says this would save Albertans, around 15 cents a litre at the pumps?
It would. Of course, the question is what it would lose the Treasury in money, and whether or not this is a tax cut to corporations, which is what sort of critics have pushed back against this, saying, it's part of the, we're in the phase, shall we say, of the leadership campaign where we're starting to see some sort of concrete policy announcements, and we've seen them from a handful of leaders, and so there's a handful that have been out there, and we'll be looking for more of those certainly in the days ahead.
Some of the UCP leadership candidates have made vaccines and vaccine mandates a major talking point with their platforms. Todd Lowen and Daniel Smith have vowed the lockdowns and mandates will never happen again. But Tyler, let me ask you something. How's that possible if the rules are mandated by Ottawa?
Well, that's the thing, some of these rules are federal. Some of them are provincial, of course, and the premier would have some say over that. But, what the important thing about this, I think, is not so much the issue of the mandates per se, but more the sort of importance that the pandemic era politics and this sort of schism, this split within the Conservative movement in Alberta is still lingering, I think, and is very important to the party. When you have a leader talking about vaccine mandates and things like that, that is a signal that they believe that question is really important to the people in the party who are going to be voting on the leadership. So it's just, it's a little bit like the Alberta autonomy thing, which other leaders have been talking about. It just goes to show that this is really important to the people within the party, or at least the people vying for the leadership think it's important to the people in the party. The bigger question, of course, is whether or not these things are important to sort of a broad cross-section of Albertans who are going to be voting for the premier. And the other notable thing that I'll just mention here is that the vaccine debate, the autonomy debate is happening within the leadership, but there's also the leaders, as I mentioned, or leadership candidates who've started coming up with sort of concrete policy proposals. There's the one you mentioned from Brian Jean, where John Sani has a whole sort of inflation fighting policy involving de-indexing some of the benefits that are out there and and re-indexing the tax brackets. And then you also have Danielle Smith coming out with announcing $300 per Albertan for sort of a health spending account for physio, chiro, mental health, dental, whatever. So you have sort of this one side, this, maybe we can call it a sort of a culture war kind of battle happening, but you also do slowly have some of these policy proposals coming out of the woodwork.
Brian Jean has allegedly said, Tyler, that people have actually died from the COVID-19 vaccines. A lot of people, Albertans, have jumped on board and agreed with him.
Yeah, and there's been some relatively recent sort of meta-analysis surveys that suggest that people have died following the vaccine, but there's not very much evidence that people have died because of the vaccine. Of course, that's a little bit different from the people who've had really bad side effects. Of course, there was lots of coverage of, I think it was myocarditis, the heart sort of disorder that some people had following vaccination. So
inflammation, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So a bit of a strange tack, shall we say, from Brian Jean, and he's come under a lot of criticism for having said that. The fears that it would scare people away from vaccines and things like that. So the vaccine thing it's lingering. And I mean, I don't know if I would have predicted that. Sort of all the leaders would have thought this was going to be such a big deal, even though in some ways this was the one thing that got Jason Kenney given the boot.
It's interesting you talk about the vaccines and talking about vaccine mandates lingering, people talking about them, but yet COVID-19 has been lingering as well for a number of years here. And we're talking about 7th, 8th, and 9th, and 10th, waves. So, yeah, I don't think this is going away anytime soon. Now, while all of this has been going down, Jason Kenney is still plugging away as premier. He was flipping flapjacks at the Calgary Stampede recently, where he announced that September 1st will be our day, Alberta Day. But Tyler, sadly, it won't be a statutory holiday.
No. So, a friend asked me earlier, they were like, what are you going to do for Alberta Day? And I said, well, I think I'm going to do what I do every day. I'll get up and I'll go to work because not that much is going to change. Now, there are going to be some announcements down the road on sort of funding and things like that for community events to sort of explore Alberta's history and celebrate Alberta's history. But here's the really confusing thing. On August 1st, we have Heritage Day, which is a civic holiday meant to celebrate Alberta's heritage. So what is the difference here between Alberta's heritage and Alberta's history on the day that we joined Confederation? So a bit of a confusing announcement, I have to say. Don't get me wrong, I love history. I'm all for celebrating it. But if we're going to have a designated day, why not give us the day off work?
Yeah, that's true too. Canada's premiers met in Victoria, BC this week, Tyler. Now they're appealing to the federal government for more funding for healthcare.
They are. There was sort of this consensus, I guess, among the premiers that Canada's healthcare system is crumbling and that they need money from the federal government to fix it. And they've been quite upset that the federal government has not agreed to sort of sit down and discuss the healthcare transfer situation. A cynic might point out that none of the premiers are talking about raising provincial taxes in order to pay for the healthcare that they want to have. So it's just notable there that they want Justin Trudeau to start cutting even bigger shinier checks for them. But the other thing I would just note that we kind of hinted at, Jason Kenney's still out working. You know, he's resigned. His time as premier is going to be coming to an end in the next couple months. But you know, he hasn't given his 2-week notice and then spent the whole time out on a cigarette break. You know, he's still getting around and making announcements and doing things, which you know, think what one may of Jason Kenney, but he does seem to still be putting in the mileage.
As the war between Ukraine and Russia continues, Tyler, more than 3,800 Ukrainians have arrived here in our province in Alberta, mostly women and children. Now, the province announced more funding for those arriving, including 6 months of temporary income assistance for those arriving after July 25th?
The Alberta government has been very bullish, shall we say, on supporting people from Ukraine who've arrived here, of course, because there's 350,000, I think, Ukrainians in Alberta, so quite a large diaspora population. And this is just sort of the latest in a series of announcements the government has made. I think they've spent about $15 million to date on supports for people coming from Ukraine. They're working to process some sort of work visas and things like that more quickly, that sort of thing. But this new announcement, as you say, is sort of temporary income assistance for food, clothing, shelter, you know, all the things that a person needs when they arrive on our shores, so to speak. And that'll cost between $15 million and I think $38 million was sort of the upper end. And, you know, the reason for that enormous range is it really just depends how many people come. Obviously, the chunk of money is going to increase if there's more people here. So just another thing that the Alberta government is doing on that front, as frankly that the story, the war in Ukraine, seems to be largely fading in a lot of ways from headlines, unfortunately.
The party which calls itself the government in waiting, the opposition NDP, say they really have a plan to fight inflation and to help farmers here in Alberta. Tell me more about some of the proposals from Rachel Notley and her team.
Right. So if people cast their minds back a couple of years, 3 years, I guess, one of the things the United Conservatives did really, really well during the Rachel Notley years was they had policy proposals, they had policy papers, they said this is what we would do. They called on the NDP to do X, Y, Z. They really, really set themselves up as the next government. And the strategy worked for them, I think, in a lot of ways. And the NDP is, you know, doing that too. And so on the inflation question, you know, the big thing that they propose is reindexing and de-indexing. So if people remember, some of the benefits that are paid out by the Alberta government, mainly AISH payments, which are payments to those with disabilities, were de-indexed, meaning they did not go up with inflation annually. And at the same time, the tax brackets were also de-indexed. And so that meant that your tax bracket did not creep upwards each year, meaning that the exemption amount at the bottom end, the $19,000 or so, would stay the same and has been the same for the last few years. So basically, this is a roundabout way of me getting to the NDP is saying that they are going to reindex both of these things to increase payments to people who are on government support and reindex the tax brackets so that you get more money exempted basically at tax season. So that's their big proposal for inflation. On the farming front, there's a handful of things, and the ones that really jumped out at me were ways to sort of lower capital costs for loans and things like that to small businesses and agricultural operators. And the other one that jumped out, which is something that the UCP has talked about, the federal Liberals, the federal Conservatives, everyone's talked about it. But it is also to improve connectivity, internet connectivity in rural areas because of the importance, certainly in this new normal, whatever new normal we're on now, you know, working from home and things like that, the internet has never been more important for people.
Yeah, farmers, producers need access to the digital age as well. They have to get online, absolutely. And the faster and the sooner the better. Tyler, the UCP has extended its utility rebate for 6 months, which will be around $300. But there is a catch. What is that catch?
Yeah, the catch is that if you live in a place where everything is sort of sub-metered is the term, you might not get the money. So if you live in a house, your power is coming to your power box thing and you're going to get the rebate. If you live in an apartment building or a condo board where there's sort of 1 meter and it's sort of defrayed across all these people, you may not get this payment. So my colleagues at the Edmonton Journal have been reporting on this, and it basically looks like a good chunk of the population will not actually get this rebate. And critics have pointed out that, you know, the people most likely to need the rebate, you know, those in rental housing and things like that, might not be the ones who get it. So as far as I've seen, there hasn't been any major movement on changing that. Logistically, one has to wonder if they even could change something like that. But certainly a little bit of a twist in an announcement that I think everyone was quite happy to hear about.
Something else we should probably talk about as well is how the Kenney government has given us that break at the pumps, 13 cents, eliminating the provincial tax for now. And there's been a talk of an extension for that as well.
There has, and I look at the pumps the price when I drive by, and I can't imagine paying what it would have been if they didn't have that. So yeah, but 13 cents, I think. And there does seem to be a little bit of a disconnect between, prices coming down with the market and things like that. So hopefully, as far as I've been told and as far as what I've seen from analysts, we should actually see prices start to go down in the next week or two for a variety of reasons, but a little more of a break for folks in the next little while, and that one's maybe thanks strictly to market forces.
And Kenney, what did he say? As long as it's above $80 or $90 US a barrel?
Yeah, $80 a barrel, I believe, and it's sort of a sliding scale. So it's the full amount when it's over $90 or $100 a barrel, and then will be X cents if it drops and things like that. So the amount might shift a little bit, but there should be a fuel tax cut for, I would imagine, the foreseeable future.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, thanks so much for joining us today from Edmonton.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
Well, many people either struggle with anger issues personally, or we know someone who does. It can leave a path of destruction behind us unless we learn how to deal with anger in a healthy way. We are honored to have Stephen Otterburn join us today from Carmel, Indiana. He's a best-selling author, chairman of New Life Ministries, host of the top-ranked Christian counseling talk show, New Life Live, and the author of 100 Days to Freedom from Anger. Welcome to Bridge City News, Stephen. So great to have you on today.
Thanks, Jeanette. Great to be with you and all the people that watch.
Thank you. So, Stephen, it seems that perhaps today people are dealing with anger more than ever before. Do you think that the political environment and isolation during the pandemic increased this level of anger that people seem to now be experiencing?
I think one of the things that happens when the world changes, like inflation, gas prices, war, things like that, that people get uneasy, or you could say very afraid. And in their fear, they become angry that things aren't the same, or they feel out of control. And it's just the go-to emotion. It's very hard for somebody to tell you, I am scared to death. But they will show that they're angry over something. And you have to look at, well, where is the real source of that anger? And when we can get down to that, because a lot of times we're being triggered. Something that happened earlier in our lives is being triggered. And if we can resolve that sometimes, then we can finally resolve the anger. But it is a tough time to be alive. And, we often say our kids won't listen to us. Well, I guarantee you they're watching us. And what we do is being internalized by them. And that you're either building connection with them in a horrifically disconnected world, or you're kind of pushing them away. And we really need, as parents, to be bringing them closer. And then we need to be closer. If you're married, you need to be closer to your spouse if we're going to get through this with the least amount of damage possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're hearing this so much, especially kids being disconnected these days. And they just spend their lives online too, connecting with others, but maybe not in such a healthy way.
Oh, definitely. And we essentially, when we give a child a phone and we don't monitor it and filter it and all of that, we're essentially turning them over to a culture that is very different than the values that many of us have. And you just have to really see that as a totally different world that not only does not support some of your values, but is pushing and promoting the other values right in your kid's face. And they don't know how to deal with that. Everything that they see is against you. Parents are stupid. Parents don't know. They're old-fashioned. And if you don't sit down with them and help them understand why all of those messages are the opposite of the message that they give them, it's really going to be hard on them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, Stephen, you've written that peace is a scarce commodity in these turbulent times. So what's the link between anger and lack of peace in one's life?
Yeah, well, if you're angry, you certainly are not at peace. And there's a process you can go through that can get you to that place of peace. So I'll just run that through you. Well, first of all, you have to stop long enough to figure out what you're, quote unquote, really angry about. And, maybe you're just furious at your husband and criticize him all the time. But actually, your husband is wearing the head of your father between his shoulders because you've got unresolved stuff with your dad. So if you could see it that way, then now we can go back to dad and realize, okay, I need to understand why dad was that way. I need to see him as a human being, not as my expectation as a perfect dad. If I can do that, then I can accept him better. Now I can forgive him. He may be long dead. He can't do anything about it. Now I can forgive him. And I can do this. This is really important. I can grieve that he never gave me what I wanted or what I really needed from a dad. I can grieve that loss. Now I can start to move on without dragging dad wherever I am. There are a lot of different sources of anger other than just a dad. But if I could see what that is and then talk about that to somebody and accept responsibility that I need to deal with that versus spew the consequences all over everybody else, I'm going to get to a place where I'm much more peaceful. Getting rid of every bit of bitterness and anger is such a favor to yourself. And, one of the blessings of my life is that I'm not an angry person. In fact, the other day I raised my voice at one of my kids and they started laughing at me because it's just not me. And I said, okay, well, I tried. But that's where you want to be, is that your go-to isn't always a reaction. It isn't always anger. When kids are troubled, they're begging for you to reach for them, not do what a lot of people do. Well, this is my chance for a teachable moment. And I'm going to tell them all about the truth that they've already rejected. So when we abandon that typical response and say, well, I'm going to make this about them. Tell me what you're going through. How did you end up feeling this way? I'm here for you. Now we've got a chance to really make a difference in their lives versus doing a stupid thing and talking about a concept. You can do that later. You should have done that in the very beginning, but now it's time to connect with their heart and win their trust. That's more important than you feeling good because you told them the truth. And I'm not down on the truth. I believe in that. But there's a time and a place for everything.
That's great advice, especially for those of us with kids. Absolutely. Now, Stephen, is there a connection between anger and maybe control or lack of control?
Well, I think people use anger to control others because they don't have, well, first of all, when you're trying to control other people, you totally remove any kind of relationship that can be authentic and free. You're just in control. When you try to criticize or control or cure or change somebody, you are wasting so much of your energy on something that cannot be done. But anger is a pretty common tool. It's a bad tool that people use to try to control others. And so I try to let people know that they're dealing with something bigger than I look like, stronger than I really am, so that they won't come against me. Well, that defensive, controlling anger, what that's doing is preventing you from ever relating to the person in a way that might reveal to you what you're really afraid of. I remember talking to this pastor in a group I was doing, and the wife said, oh my goodness, he's so angry at these kids and he's just destroying our relationship with the kids. And I said to him, well, let me ask you a question. What are you so afraid of? He just burst into tears. And what he was afraid of is that he was going to lose his kids trying to control them the way his father lost him. He was producing the exact same effect, but in using a different method. And once he saw that, then he was able to see that if you're afraid of losing your kids, loving, connecting, noticing them, affirming them, heck of a lot better than being angry when they don't do something that you think they, quote unquote, should be doing. So we need to look deeper. A lot of people say, I don't want to look inside or that. Well, if you enjoy the superficial life, great. But I'm telling you, a lot of people would be better off, especially you, if you would try to take a look at some of the source causes of your discomfort and the expression of some unhealthy emotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Now, I think some of us maybe won't ever or don't ever deal properly with our anger issues. So what happens to unresolved anger? I know before you were mentioning how it can manifest in really negative ways.
Well, it makes you sick is the one thing that it does. And we know a lot of people that have literally, they have high blood pressure because they're on alert all the time. They're on defense all the time. And everything is a horrifically stressful time for them. And when they are communicating in a relationship, it's so uncomfortable for them because they don't want to sense any kind of vulnerability. So you can have high blood pressure, you can have heart problems, all sorts of things can happen. I know I went through a time early in life. I think this is how I learned my lesson. And I ended up with ulcerative colitis while I was in college. And it was two things, some unresolved emotion and the secrecy around that. And this was just the physiological effect. But also, our minds are very, very fragile sometimes. And if you just keep feeding your brain with anger, bitterness, every kind of reason to reject people, you just get emotionally unhealthy, unbalanced. And so if that's the way you are, what do? Well, you just need to get some help. Getting help isn't a weakness, it's a strength. And there are a lot of great therapists. I tell people all the time, I really think God has someone just for you. And it might be a psychiatrist who could prescribe the right medication to help you get through this. So, and I really believe that.
Mm-hmm. Therapy definitely works. Are there any healthy ways to release our anger?
Well, sure. I mean, if you sit down right now and get a piece of paper and start, over the past, have found myself angry in these situations. I have tended to be angry when somebody has done this. And you start to look at where are the sources, where has this come? Is there a pattern over the past? Now you sit down and you share that with somebody that's wise. You get their insight, their input about that. And then here's the insight that I think changes the world. You convince yourself that it's going to be okay because everything that you were angry about and worried about, you don't even know what it is now. It all worked out. You're still here. It became okay. So based on past history, we know it's going to be okay. You're going to find a way. And when we feel confident that we're competent to get through this time, that we can make it, we can figure things out, then maybe we're not so in need of control, we're not so reactionary, and we're not so angry. So that's one way to get started on resolving it. The goal in life, I wrote this in a book called Take Your Life Back, is to stop reacting to things like with anger and start responding to people. And that's a different way of living. And a lot of people, that's all reaction, no response.
We're almost out of time here, Stephen, but great advice from you. I really love the pen and paper trick. I know I'm a journaler. I like to journal, so I think that's great. It also would probably require us to be very self-aware that maybe people aren't even aware how angry that they are.
Hey, if you're confused, ask somebody, do you see me as an angry person? put down the gun or the stick first, and then ask them if they see you as an angry person, and hopefully they'll tell you what they see.
Exactly. Thanks so much for being with us today, Stephen. Great advice.
Yeah. God bless you.
Stephen Arterburn is the author of 100 Days to Freedom from Anger. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.